All right, so today I'm going to talk about comparative advantage and terms of trade, which is part of Unit 1 in the AP curriculum. But in our textbook, it is small parts of chapters 6 and 37. It is technically foreign exchange, but foreign exchange is Unit 5, and so the actual foreign exchange graph is not what we're going to be doing because the AP test is saying that that's not a thing that we need to do for this year. But they want just to make sure Unit 1 is fair game, and so I'm going to cover this. All right, so what we have is two nations, Nation A and Nation B. I'm keeping it simple and not coming up with fancy names just to make it easy and to avoid any copyright or anything like that. So Nation A produces guns and butter. Nation B also produces guns and butter. Remember when we talked about production possibilities curves that there are several assumptions we have to make, that these are the only two products they're producing and that they're using all their resources fully and efficiently. We're also going to assume, just because of a technicality when we get to definitions, that they have the exact same amount of resources, Nation A and Nation B. Okay, so Nation A can make up to 5 guns, but if they do so, they make 0 butter. They can make up to 5 butter, but if they do so, they make 0 guns. That means that their opportunity cost for 1 gun is 1 butter. And I made these linear instead of exhibiting diminishing returns or diminishing marginal utility or any of that stuff. I made them linear just so it's easier. But it still works if it was curved, like a normal production possibilities curve. But for this, we're just going to keep it simple with a linear. So what we'll say is, the way we notate that is, 1 gun, 1 butter is the trade-off. Their opportunity cost for 1 gun is 1 butter. Every time they want to make 1 gun, they have to give up 1 butter. I know, it's not realistic. Get over it. All right, Nation B. They can make up to 5 guns with using all their resources, but they'd make 0 butter. However, if they use all the resources to make butter, they can make 15 butter. Meaning that the opportunity cost is, for each gun, the cost is 3 butter. Put another way, each butter costs them 1/3 of a gun. This is all review. This should not be new to you. What might be new to you, or what might be something, and I know I covered this. I know we talked about this. It's just a question of, it was a long time ago. So if you were to look at these two nations, and I had you do this exercise, and say, should these nations trade? The answer is yes. So what we're going to look at is which nation should produce which product. Every time they make a gun, they have to give up a butter. Every time they make a gun, they have to give up 3 butters. So Nation A produces guns more efficiently. It only costs them 1 butter. Nation B then produces butter more efficiently. They only have to give up 1/3 of a gun for each butter, whereas they have to give up 1 whole gun. Meaning, this nation should produce guns, and this nation should produce butter. Okay? What we say is that Nation A has a comparative advantage for guns, and comparative advantage means that you make something more efficiently than another nation when comparing two nations. And kind of the nature of comparative advantages, if it's 2 products, if one nation has a comparative advantage in one product, by definition, the other nation has a comparative advantage in the other product. So these guys have a comparative advantage in guns. These guys have a comparative advantage in butter. They make it cheaper. Since they have comparative advantages, they can and should trade. The way it works is like this. You have to figure out a trade between the two that works for both nations. In this instance, I made it nice and easy. If they can get more than one butter for every gun they trade away, they're better off than if they did it themselves. At home, domestically, with no trade, every time they want a butter, they give up one gun. So, if they can either give up less than one gun per butter, or for each gun they give up, get more than one butter in return, they're better off. These guys, every time they make 3 butters, it costs them 1 gun. Meaning, if they can give up less than 3 butters per gun, or if they can get more than 1 gun for 3 butters, either way, it's just ratios, then they'll be better off. So we have to figure out a trade that works for both of those. So it needs to be greater than 1 gun and less than 3 butters. So 1 gun, greater than 1 butter and less than 3 butters. 1 gun to 2 butters would work for both nations. These guys would produce butter. They'd make 3 butter, or they make 6 butter. Let's say they make 6 butter, and if they trade that 6 butter away, they'll get 3 guns, whereas they'd only get 2 guns if they did it themselves. These guys, if they trade away those 2 guns, they'll get 6 butter instead of 2 butter. So that's kind of, if they trade away 2 guns, they'll get 4 butter. But still, it's better than 2 butter. So that's kind of the way that works. I don't think that's going to be on the AP test, but I think that more of what's the comparative advantage between the two. Now, here's what's not in your book. Absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is defined as the ability to produce more, just a raw number, more than another nation using the same resources. So if we assume that both these nations have equal resources, nobody has a comparative advantage absolute advantage in guns, because it can both make up to 5. But in butter, nation B can make 3 times more butter using all their resources. They would have an absolute advantage in butter. No one would have an absolute advantage in guns. If this was 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then that would make this, that would change, a lot of things. 1 gun is 1/2 butter, or 1/2 gun is 1 butter, 2 guns equals 1 butter. They could still trade, but if this were the case, then these guys would have the absolute advantage in guns, because they just make more given the same resources. And that's kind of what you need to know. Looking at a graph, let me pull this back a little bit. Okay. Looking at this graph of guns and butter, this is the same as what we had up here, the original one. Okay, we have 5 guns and 5 butter for nation A. We have 5 guns to 15, let me label that, 15 butter for nation B. This is just a graphical representation of these. So you'll see these on the AP test, and then you just need to know these costs right here, these 2. That's what these are displaying. And if you know that, then you can say nobody's got an absolute advantage in guns. Nation B has an absolute advantage in butter. And then you can figure out the terms of trade if you want to, because this is 1-to-1 and 1-to-3. The natural trade would be 1-to-2. If this was 2-to-1, or rather 1-to-1/2, and this was 1-to-3, then the trade would be anything in between 1/2 and 3. Anything, any number in between would be a reasonable terms of, you just pick one. It doesn't really matter. I would encourage you to look over the FRQs from the AP test to see how that looks. There's one with Artland and Rayland. I think it's bicycles. And then there's a few more. Atlantis, I think, is one of them. Anyway, look them over, and then ask questions, and we'll go from there.